I didn't think much of being home alone. It wasn't the first time, and my house wasn't in some remote area or surrounded by spooky woods. It was just a normal house in a normal neighborhood, with friendly neighbors and a grocery store just down the street. In fact, being home alone for a few days while my parents went on a weekend getaway sounded kind of nice. I had the whole house to myself, no one to bother me, no rules, just me and the freedom to do whatever I wanted. The first day was uneventful. I slept in, made a big breakfast, and watched some TV later. I invited a couple of friends over, and we hung out for a while before they left, leaving me to enjoy my solitude. By the time night fell, the house was quiet, peaceful. I decided to watch a few movies, grab some snacks, and have a lazy evening. Around midnight, I started getting that familiar feeling you get when you're home alone, the one where every creak or groan of the house seems louder than usual. But I shrug it off. Old houses make noises. I had lived here long enough to know that the heating system and floorboards were prone to all kinds of harmless sounds. I wasn't the type to scare easily, so I didn't let it bother me. I went up to my room, locked the door more out of habit than fear, and lay down to sleep. It was quiet, nothing unusual. I fell asleep quickly, only to be woken up by the sound of something banging downstairs. It was loud. Not a random thump, like a house settling, but more like a hard knock against the door or window. I sat up, heart pounding, listening closely. There was silence for a moment, and I thought maybe I had imagined it. But then, there it was again, 3 loud bangs in quick succession. It came from the direction of the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and checked the security app my parents had installed. The cameras showed nothing unusual. The front door was closed, the windows were all shut, and the backyard was empty. Relieved, I figured it might be some animal outside or something that fell over in the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I crept downstairs, turning on lights as I went. The house was still and quiet. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked the windows, the back door, and the garage, but everything was locked up tight. With no sign of an intruder, I started to relax. Just as I was about to head back upstairs, the bangs came again, this time louder, as if someone was pounding right against the back door. I froze, my heart racing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I could feel something was wrong, but I couldn't explain it. I slowly approached the kitchen, trying to keep my breathing steady. When I got to the back door, I stared at it, half expecting to see someone standing on the other side, but there was no one. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence. Suddenly, the door handle rattled, and I jumped back. My mind raced. I had checked the cameras. There was no one outside. How could the handle be moving? I grabbed the kitchen knife, not knowing what else to do. Then, as quickly as it had started, the rattling stopped. The house was quiet again. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the door. Then something caught my eye. A piece of paper, small and crumpled, was lying on the floor just inside the doorframe. I hadn't noticed it before. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up and unfolded it. Scrawled in messy handwriting were the words, "I see you." A chill ran down my spine. I stared at the note, my mind scrambling for an explanation. I had been alone in the house all day, and no one had come by. How did this note get here? My breathing grew shallow, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I dropped the note and stepped away, keeping the knife clenched in my hand. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I pulled it out and saw a notification from the security app. Motion detected in the backyard. I clicked on the alert, expecting to see a stray animal or maybe some leaves blowing around. But when the feed came up, my stomach dropped. There was a figure standing just outside the range of the camera's light. It was barely visible, more of a shadowy outline, but it was there. Someone or something was standing in my backyard, just out of reach of the camera, watching. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen, hoping the figure would move into the light so I could see it clearly. But it didn't. It just stood there, motionless, like it was waiting for something. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was just a prank, I thought. Some neighborhood kid messing around. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was something wrong about the way the figure just stood there, too still, too deliberate. I decided to call the police. I didn't want to take any chances. As I dialed the number, the figure on the screen moved. Slowly, it started walking toward the side of the house, out of the camera's view. My heart raced. I ran to the living room window, peeking through the blinds, but there was no sign of anyone. The dispatcher on the phone assured me that a patrol car was on the way, but it would be at least 15 minutes before they arrived. That was when I heard the sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the side of the house. I backed away from the window, my eyes fixed on the front door, listening as the footsteps grew closer. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever or whatever it was right outside. Then, as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps stopped. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles were white. The silence was deafening, every second dragging on like an eternity. And then, without warning, the front door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately. I could hear the faint creak of the mechanism as it moved. I panicked, running toward the door to lock it, but just as I reached out, the handle snapped back into place. The door remained closed. I backed away again, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, helpless, as if I was being toyed with. The air in the house felt heavy, oppressive, like something was watching me from the shadows. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my eyes darting around the room, expecting something to burst through the door at any moment. But nothing happened. The house remained silent. Then, in the quiet, I heard it, a faint whisper. My name, spoken softly from somewhere inside the house. My blood ran cold. I spun around, looking for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. It felt like the walls were closing in, like I was being watched from every angle. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The room plunged into darkness, and I was left standing in the pitch black, clutching the knife, my heart racing. I could barely see a thing, but I felt the presence. Something was in the room with me. I fumbled for my phone, using the screen's light to illuminate the room. In the dim glow, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the corner. A dark figure crouched low, watching me with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. I backed up, trying to keep the light on it, but the figure was too fast. It darted toward me, moving with unnatural speed, and before I could react, it was gone, disappearing into the shadows. The lights flickered back on, and the room was empty again. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see another notification from the security app. Motion detected in the living room. I didn't need to check the camera. I knew whatever it was already here. In that moment, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I bolted out of the front door, not caring if the figure followed me. I sprinted down the street, my feet pounding against the pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the neighbor's house, pounding on their door until they opened it, wide-eyed and confused. The police arrived shortly after, but by then, the figure was gone. They searched the house, but there was no sign of an intruder. No fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing. I never found out who or what had been in my house that night. But I moved out shortly after, unable to shake the feeling that I had been watched, hunted by something that didn't belong in this world. The worst part, when I went back to collect the rest of my things, I found another note on the kitchen counter, written in the same messy handwriting as the first. It simply said, "I'll be back." I had always loved the solitude of my home, especially on nights when the world outside felt heavy with silence. My friends would often joke about my preference for staying in, but there was something comforting about being surrounded by familiar walls and the soft glow of my lamps. So, when I found myself home alone on a chilly autumn evening, I was more than content. The leaves rustled outside, and the wind howled through the trees, creating a symphony of natural sounds that made me feel cozy and safe. I had planned a simple evening, a warm meal, my favorite movie, and a few hours of unwinding. As I settled onto the couch, popcorn in hand, I lost myself in the flickering images on the screen. The rain began to fall, drumming against the windows, and I smiled to myself, thinking it was the perfect setting for a night in. About an hour into the film, I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. It was soft at first, like a faint tapping. I paused the movie, straining to listen. The sound persisted, rhythmic and persistent. I dismissed it as the house settling or the wind rattling something outside. I got up, ready to refill my popcorn, when I noticed the kitchen light was flickering. A wave of unease washed over me, but I shrugged it off. Old houses had quirks, right? As I walked into the kitchen, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The room felt different, like the atmosphere had shifted. I flipped the light switch, and the bulb flickered erratically before finally stabilizing. Just then, I noticed something odd. The back door, which I was sure I had locked earlier, was slightly ajar, and not formed in my stomach. I was certain I had locked it, but in the heat of the moment, I must have forgotten. I approached the door cautiously, peering into the darkness outside. The rain had intensified, and the wind howled louder, creating a haunting ambience. Taking a deep breath, I closed the door tightly and locked it. I convinced myself it was nothing, just the wind playing tricks on me. Returning to the couch, I tried to immerse myself in the movie again, but my focus was shot. I could feel the tension creeping into my mind. Minutes later, a loud crash echoed through the house, making my heart race. I shot upright, adrenaline flooding my system. The sound came from upstairs. My mind raced with possibilities. A picture frame had fallen. Something had slipped off a shelf. I was torn between the urge to investigate and the instinct to hide under the covers. I grabbed my phone, its screen glowing in the dark, and tiptoed toward the staircase. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. The hallway was dim, illuminated only by the light from my living room. With every step, the floorboards creaked beneath me, and the shadows seemed to stretch and dance. I reached the bottom of the stairs, the eerie silence pressing in around me. I climbed the steps slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the landing, I paused. The door to the bathroom was slightly ajar. I felt a strange compulsion to push it open, but I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to back away. Gathering my courage, I gently pushed the door, and it creaked open. Inside, the bathroom was empty, but as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. A flash of movement behind me made my heart drop. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. My breath came in short gasps. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I hurried back downstairs, my heart pounding louder than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt thick, suffocating. I decided to call my best friend, hoping that hearing a familiar voice would calm my nerves. As the phone rang, I paced the living room, glancing at the door, half expecting it to burst open. Just as my friend picked up, a deafening bang echoed from the back of the house. The sound made me nearly drop my phone. I glanced at the door, my heart racing. I whispered into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady, but my friend could hear the fear in my tone. I explained what had happened, the noises, the door being ajar, the crash upstairs. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging me into darkness for a heartbeat before they returned. I glanced at the window, the rain now pouring in sheets, the wind howling outside. My friend, sensing my panic, suggested I lock all the doors and windows, just to be safe. I agreed, realizing I hadn't checked the front door. As I turned to make my way back to the front of the house, a low growl resonated from the kitchen. My heart stopped. It was a sound I had never heard before, deep and guttural. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was close. I slowly turned to look down the hallway toward the kitchen, my breath caught in my throat. Then, I saw it. A figure stood in the kitchen doorway. It was tall, its form shrouded in shadow, but I could make out its silhouette. The growl grew louder, more menacing, vibrating through the air. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to process what I was seeing. My phone slipped from my grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. Just as I was about to scream, the figure moved. I stumbled backward, barely managing to catch myself against the wall. The creature stepped into the light, and I felt my blood run cold. It was a dog, or something that looked like a dog. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of a normal dog, with matted fur and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Its teeth were sharp and menacing, dripping with what I could only assume was saliva. I had never seen anything like it, but there was something else. Its eyes were not just wild, they were intelligent, calculating, as if it was assessing me. It took a step forward, and I bolted toward the front door. I didn't care if I left my phone or anything else behind. I had to get out. As I reached the door, I fumbled with the lock, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The growl intensified, echoing in the hall, and I could feel the creature's breath on my neck. Finally, I yanked the door open and stumbled outside into the rain. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop running. I sprinted into the night, heart racing, breath coming in desperate gasps. I could hear the pounding of paws behind me, the creature chasing me into the storm. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I would freeze. I ran down the street, rain soaking through my clothes, and I heard the growl turn into a howl that seemed to pierce through the storm. I didn't stop until I reached a nearby convenience store, bursting through the door, gasping for breath. The clerk looked at me with wide eyes, and I quickly explained what had happened. He reached for the phone to call the police, but I interrupted him. I needed to make sure the creature wouldn't follow me. We stood in the store, anxiously watching the door, the rain pounding outside. Minutes felt like hours, and I could still hear the faint echoes of that terrifying howl. Eventually, I mustered the courage to call my friend again, telling her I was safe but shaken. Hours later, when the police arrived to check on the situation, they found nothing. No signs of a creature, no unusual tracks, nothing to suggest anything out of the ordinary had happened. I was left feeling hollow, wondering if it had all been a hallucination or a trick of my mind. I returned home the next day, reluctantly, and found my phone where it had fallen. The fear had subsided, replaced by a nagging curiosity. I checked the locks, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. But as I stood there in my living room, I noticed something strange. On my wall, a new mark had appeared. A deep scratch, like claw marks, ran from the floor to the ceiling, jagged and deep. I stumbled back, my heart racing again. I had locked everything tight. How could this have happened? Suddenly, I remembered my neighbor, the one I barely knew. What if he had seen something too? I hurried outside, running to his door. I knocked frantically, but there was no answer. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I returned to my house, heart racing, ready to bolt the door again. But as I stepped inside, I heard a soft sound behind me. Turning slowly, I saw the creature once more, now sitting calmly in the shadows just beyond the threshold. Its eyes glinted in the dim light, and it didn't growl. Instead, it tilted its head, almost curiously, as if it were trying to communicate. In that moment, I understood. I had stumbled into its territory, and it had simply wanted me to know. I felt a wave of fear mixed with an inexplicable sense of connection. I was not in danger, but I was a visitor in a world that existed just outside my own. The creature stood, its form large and imposing but somehow less threatening than before. It backed away slowly, disappearing into the shadows, leaving me in a state of shock. I had survived the encounter, but my life would never be the same. That night, I sat in my living room, lights on, doors locked, trying to convince myself it was all over. But deep down, I knew the creature was still out there, watching, waiting for me to understand the rules of its game. I had always enjoyed spending time alone in my home. The solitude allowed me to read, binge-watch shows, and immerse myself in hobbies without distractions. So when a rare weekend opportunity arose for my family to go out of town, I was more than happy to hold down the fort. The first evening was perfect. I spent hours on the couch, lost in a gripping series, surrounded by snacks and a cozy blanket. The only light came from the flickering television screen, casting shadows on the walls. As the night grew late, I finally decided to turn in. The peace of the evening lulled me to sleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. Around 3 a.m, a sudden sound jolted me awake. It was a loud thud, echoing through the silence of the house. I lay still, heart racing, straining to listen for any sign of what had caused the noise. It sounded like it came from downstairs. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it just the house settling? Had something fallen? Taking a deep breath, I mustered the courage to get out of bed. I crept to the bedroom door and peeked out into the dark hallway. The faint glow of the streetlight outside filtered through the window, illuminating just enough for me to see. Everything appeared normal. My heart still pounding, I tiptoed down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. As I reached the bottom, I felt an unsettling chill creep down my spine. The house felt too quiet, too still. I flipped on the light in the living room, illuminating the space. Everything looked undisturbed. I took a moment to steady my breathing, reassuring myself that I was simply overreacting. Maybe it was just the wind. Just as I turned to head back to bed, I heard it again, a muffled rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I froze, my instinct screaming at me to turn and run, but curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I took a cautious step toward the kitchen, my heart thudding in my ears. The kitchen was dark, the only light coming from the refrigerator, which hummed softly as it worked. I switched on the overhead light, and the brightness flooded the room. I squinted toward the pantry, the door slightly ajar. With a shaky hand, I pushed it open wider. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. Nothing looked out of place. I felt foolish for letting my imagination run wild. It was probably just a loose bag of flour or something. I chuckled nervously, shaking my head. As I turned to leave the kitchen, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. My stomach dropped. The pantry door had swung closed on its own. I stepped back, my heart racing again, fighting the urge to scream. I slowly approached the pantry door, my breath hitching in my throat. I yanked it open, fully expecting to find nothing but empty shelves. Instead, I found a small shadow darting behind a large bag of rice. My heart dropped as I realized it wasn't an animal or anything mundane. It was too small, too quick. I felt an icy dread wash over me. I called out, trying to sound brave but failing miserably. "Is someone there?" Silence. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I slammed the pantry door closed and rushed to grab my phone. My hands shook as I unlocked it. I considered calling someone, anyone, but my mind raced with thoughts of how ridiculous I would sound. Just then, I heard it again, a soft, almost playful giggle coming from the hallway. I froze, my blood running cold. There should be no one else here. It was just me. My heart pounded as I carefully stepped out of the kitchen, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, ready to dial for help. I peered around the corner. The hallway stretched before me, empty but feeling heavy with an invisible presence. I was ready to bolt when I heard the giggle again, now closer, coming from upstairs. I couldn't decide whether to run or investigate. Curiosity got the best of me, and against my better judgment, I tiptoed up the stairs, every creak making me jump. As I reached the landing, the giggle came again, this time more pronounced, almost like it was taunting me. I followed the sound down the hallway toward the bathroom. The door was cracked open, a sliver of light spilling out. I reached for the doorknob, hesitated for a moment, and then pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty. The light flickered above, creating strange shadows across the tiles. I stepped inside, the floor cold against my bare feet, peering into the mirror to check my reflection. My face looked pale, eyes wide with fear. Just then, I heard a sudden crash behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. My heart raced as I backed toward the door, ready to make a run for it. But then, out of nowhere, the bathroom light flickered one last time and went out, plunging me into darkness. I gasped and stumbled toward the door, fumbling for the knob. As my fingers brushed it, the light flickered back on. But when I looked up, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the mirror behind me, I saw a small figure standing in the corner of the bathroom. It looked like a child, hunched over and covered in shadows. I turned, heart racing, but nothing was there. I swung around again, and the figure was gone. Panic surged through me. I bolted out of the bathroom and down the hallway, my heart pounding wildly. I sprinted for the stairs, desperate to escape whatever was haunting me. Just as I reached the bottom, I heard the giggle again, louder, right behind me. I turned around, and there it was. The shadowy figure stood at the top of the stairs, grinning at me, a childlike grin filled with mischief. In a moment of sheer terror, I turned and ran straight to the front door. I fumbled with the lock, adrenaline pumping, and finally flung it open. I burst outside into the cool night air, panting, heart racing. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the driveway. I turned back, looking at my house, expecting to see the figure in the window, but there was nothing. Just darkness. Breathing heavily, I pulled out my phone and called my family. They answered grudgingly, confused about why I sounded so frantic. I told them I wanted to come stay with them for the night. I spent the rest of the night in my car parked outside their house, heart racing, eyes glued to the front door of my own home. The darkness loomed around me, thick and foreboding. The next day, I returned with my family, determined to face whatever had terrified me. The house felt eerily quiet, the shadows hanging heavy in every corner. I inspected every room, finding nothing out of the ordinary. I finally stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to convince myself that I had overreacted. Just then, my family's laughter echoed from the kitchen, breaking the silence. I joined them, feeling a little better. As I turned to leave the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. When I turned back to the mirror, my heart dropped. There, on the bathroom counter, was a small toy wooden figure of a girl with pigtails, grinning up at me with an unsettling smile. It had not been there before. I picked it up, feeling a chill creep up my spine. It was so out of place, so wrong. Then, I noticed something else, carved into the bottom of the toy were the words "Let's play." I dropped the toy, watching it clatter to the floor, my blood running cold. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the laughter from the kitchen stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard the sound of soft giggles echoing through the house, growing louder and more chaotic. I ran out of the bathroom, my family now looking at me with alarm. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. We all turned, panic surging through us. The house felt alive, vibrating with an energy I couldn't comprehend. I grabbed my family, pulling them toward the back door, desperate to escape the suffocating darkness. But as we reached the door, it wouldn't budge. I banged on it, shouting for help. The giggles echoed all around us, turning into laughter, as if we were the ones trapped in a game we couldn't understand. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Whatever had been haunting my home had been waiting for me all along, and it wasn't going to let us leave that easily. I had always loved the idea of spending a weekend alone at home. No distractions, just the freedom to enjoy my own company and relax without the pressures of work or social obligations. I had stocked up on snacks, planned a movie marathon, and even set aside some time to read a book I had been meaning to get to. The first evening went perfectly, with nothing more than the soft sounds of the house settling and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. On the second night, everything changed. The sun had set, and I had just finished watching a horror movie. The ambience was perfect for a chill night, but I couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. I shrugged it off, deciding that it was just the after effects of the movie. I poured myself some popcorn and settled into my favorite chair, ready to start the next film. About halfway through the movie, I heard a strange sound coming from the kitchen. At first, it was so faint I thought I was imagining it, a sort of soft tapping against the floor. I paused the movie and listened intently. The sound continued, more pronounced now, like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. My heart began to race. I stood up, trying to convince myself it was just the house making noises. I walked to the kitchen, the cool tile feeling almost comforting against my bare feet. I flipped on the light, and everything looked normal. The sink was empty, the countertops clean, and the refrigerator hummed softly in the corner. I stood there for a moment, scanning the room, then decided it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I went back to the living room, determined to enjoy my evening, but then, just as I settled back into my chair, I heard it again. This time, it was much closer, almost as if it were coming from the hallway. I froze, straining to hear. It was a low, rhythmic thudding sound, like a heavy footstep. My mind raced as I considered the possibilities. Was someone in the house? I lived alone and had locked all the doors. I grabbed my phone and silently tiptoed toward the hallway, the cold tiles now sending chills up my spine. I reached the hallway and flicked on the light. The bulb flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The hallway was empty. I peered into the bathroom and the spare room, but there was nothing out of place. I shook my head, telling myself I was being ridiculous. I turned off the light and headed back to my movie. As the film played, I found it hard to focus. My heart thumped loudly in my chest, and I felt an unease settle over me like a heavy blanket. I decided to distract myself by browsing my phone. Just as I started scrolling, I heard it again. This time, it sounded like something sliding across the floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. My heart leapt into my throat. I bolted up, feeling an instinctual urge to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and moved cautiously toward the source of the noise, which was now undeniably coming from the basement door at the end of the hallway. I had never liked that basement. It was dark and musty, and the stairs creaked ominously whenever I used them. I stood in front of the basement door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The door was slightly ajar, and a thin line of darkness loomed on the other side. I took a deep breath, mustered my courage, and pushed the door open, the hinges protesting with a loud creak that echoed down the hall. The basement was dark and silent. I flicked on the flashlight, illuminating the steps that led down into the abyss. I could feel the air shift as I descended, the stale smell of dampness and decay assaulting my senses. I reached the bottom of the stairs and scanned the room with my flashlight. Shadows danced along the walls, and the only sound was the faint dripping of water somewhere in the distance. Suddenly, I noticed something on the ground. It was a series of small, muddy footprints leading deeper into the basement. I swallowed hard, dread pooling in my stomach. The prints didn't belong to me. I had never gone down there barefoot. I hesitated, the beam of my flashlight flickering over the floor, following the trail of prints as they disappeared behind a pile of old boxes. Without thinking, I stepped further into the room, drawn by a mixture of fear and curiosity. As I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, sitting in the corner of the basement, was an old, tattered doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, and one of its eyes was missing. It was covered in dust, but there was something off about it. It seemed to be facing me, as if it had been placed there deliberately. Just then, I heard a noise behind me, and my heart leapt. I spun around, shining the flashlight in the direction of the sound, but all I found was the darkness of the basement. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the feeling of being watched washed over me. I backed away from the doll, my instincts screaming at me to get out. As I turned to leave, I heard it again, a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, breathing heavily as I leaned against it, trying to process what had just happened. I raced back to the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't care about the movie anymore. All I wanted was to feel safe. I locked the front door and checked the windows, ensuring they were all securely fastened. I sat down on the couch, my hands shaking, and pulled my knees to my chest, staring at the front door. Then, the power went out. The sudden darkness engulfed the room, and I could hear the wind howling outside. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone, only to realize the battery was dead. Panic set in, and I felt the walls closing in on me. I stumbled to the window, hoping to see something outside, anything to reassure me. As I peered through the glass, I saw a shadow moving across the yard, but it was gone before I could focus on it. I turned away, heart pounding in my ears, and looked toward the hallway. My instincts told me to stay where I was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. I heard a faint noise, almost like a whisper, calling from the hallway. It sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't take it any longer. I grabbed a flashlight I kept in a drawer and crept down the hallway toward the basement door. I couldn't let whatever was happening go unanswered. I had to confront it. I reached for the doorknob, ready to face whatever lay behind it. Just as I was about to turn the handle, I heard a loud crash behind me, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. My heart stopped. I turned around to see the door to my bedroom wide open, the dark interior swallowing the light from my flashlight. There was something in there. I could feel it. My legs moved before I could think. I dashed back to the living room, adrenaline surging through my veins. I pulled the couch cushions off and piled them in front of the front door, trying to barricade myself. I could hear the shuffling getting closer, the sound of something moving deliberately, methodically. The darkness felt alive, wrapping around me as I huddled behind the couch, my breath shallow and quick. I felt the urge to scream, to call for help, but no sound would come out. Then, the whispers grew louder, filling the air around me. I could make out words now, but they were just beyond my comprehension. It felt like a chant, an incantation woven through the air. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that it would all just go away. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the front door swung open, crashing against the wall. I opened my eyes, heart racing, and saw a figure standing there in the doorway. It was shrouded in darkness, and the only thing I could make out was the outline of something large, looming, and unnatural. And then it stepped into the light. What I saw froze me in place. The creature that emerged wasn't human, nor was it an animal. It had elongated limbs, a twisted face that looked almost familiar, but wrong in so many ways. Its eyes were wide and empty, staring straight through me. I felt bile rise in my throat as it opened its mouth, the whispers spilling out in a chilling cacophony. Then it spoke, "Come play with me." In an instant, I realized why it felt familiar. The face twisted in an unnatural way, and my heart sank as I recognized the features. It was the old doll from the basement. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the floor as I raced through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the yard. I could hear the creature behind me, its voice echoing in my ears, taunting me, urging me to come back. I didn't stop running until I reached the street, gasping for breath and desperate for safety. I turned around to look back at my house, heart pounding. The front door stood wide open, and the darkness within seemed to stretch toward me, hungry. And then I realized it was too late. I had left something behind. As I stood there, trembling and terrified, I felt a chill run down my spine. The shadows began to shift again, and from the corner of my eye I saw something moving inside the house. It wasn't gone, and it wasn't going to leave me alone.